Hello and welcome back to Book and Page. We are still working our way through The Lightning Thief with chapters 13 and 14 today. Man, that chapter 13 really would be a cliffhanger if we weren't continuing immediately on to the next one. As usual, brief summary of what happened in the chapters, and then we talk about some things a little more. So, chapter 13. The campers are now on a train headed west. They've got some tickets to Denver. First 2 days, pretty much nothing happening. They're sleeping. Percy's dealing with the fact that, his father-in-law has led people to believe that he's probably guilty of his mother's murder. He saw some Greek monsters? No one else noticing this? Nope. No, they're not. Also, he and Annabeth not getting along very well. But that's okay. They're figuring things out as well as they can. Annabeth asks about Percy's dreams, and Percy admits that he's been seeing this figure and speaking to this figure in his dreams. But Annabeth points out that's not Hades' MO. The visualization is wrong. Percy kind of agrees, but he's not quite sure what's going on. And Annabeth ultimately ends up talking about her life. It turns out, since her father is mortal, Annabeth showed up in a basket just magically one day, and he was forced to take her by Athena, her mother. Father, not so happy about this. Stepmother, at a later point, definitely not happy about this. And ultimately, at age 7, Annabeth ran away. Thankfully, Athena seemed to be looking out for her and got her hooked up with some other demigods. But at that point in time, Annabeth is done reminiscing out loud, and Percy leaves her to her memories. They start fighting again, though, when they pull into St. Louis with the archway. It turns out Annabeth wants to be an architect. Percy finds that funny. They don't really get along, but they decide to hop off at St. Louis to visit the arch while they're here. Percy, though, is the one super suspicious this time. Something about it makes him deeply uncomfortable, and he wonders after the Helm of Darkness and whether Hades could be watching them at any point. Which Annabeth and Grover go, yeah, kind of, and then proceed to go visit the arch anyways. The visit itself seems to go okay, but when Percy is forced to wait for a second elevator, he is attacked by a woman and her chihuahua. It turns out, though, the chihuahua is actually a chimera, and I'm going to get this name terribly wrong, but the woman is actually Enchidin, the mother of monsters, who we named an anteater after, apparently, and she really likes that. Ultimately, this battle does not go Percy's way. He loses Riptide through a hole in the arch, and as a moment of sort of self-sacrifice, he throws himself out of that hole into the Mississippi River. Not before, though, he's mocked for being faithless and not believing that his father will actually help him. He does pray to his father right at that last moment, though. And that's where we end. Percy throwing himself out of the archway. Except chapter 14 picks up immediately, where Percy admits that he wasn't exactly brave during the fall, but when he hits the water, he discovers something strange. The impact didn't kill him, despite the distance. He is breathing underwater, and he is perfectly dry. In fact, everything he touches is also perfectly dry. When he lets it go, though, it becomes wet again. Percy is smart enough to at least thank Poseidon for the save, but he feels rather cowardly having left mortals in danger in jumping out of the arch. In that moment, though, a woman appears in the water. She's a little hard to see through all the murk and garbage, but a messenger from his father arrives to tell him that he must go to Santa Monica before he goes to the underworld. She also attempts to tell him not to trust the gifts, but disappears before she can finish that sentence. Percy grabs Riptide, swims up out of the Mississippi, and finds the arch in absolute chaos. Emergency vehicles, news vans, everyone speculating whether or not it was a terrorist attack, and wouldn't you know it, a little boy, Percy Jackson, wanted fugitive, somehow blew up the arch. Thankfully, though, Grover and Annabeth find Percy, and they make an escape back to the train, back to Denver, is where their ticket ultimately gets them, with the plan to get to Santa Monica if they don't get caught by the police before that point. Yeah, no, Percy is now a wanted fugitive at all of 12 years old. Whew. It's sort of very interesting throughout this set of chapters that we get the play up of the mist. So the mist is the sort of magical ability of the world itself to hide all his supernatural happenings from mere mortals. So Percy sees his picture in the newspaper of him coming off the bus and recognizes he's holding Riptide in his hand, but the picture is actually blurry, and he notes that it could have been a baseball bat or maybe a lacrosse stick, but something that he can act violently with. Especially if everyone thinks that you're just a lunatic 12-year-old who killed your mother. And this happens again when it comes to the woman and her chihuahua. The brain can't really contemplate what's happening. And the little girl can see moments, like when Percy just walks out of the Mississippi River perfectly dry. But when he watches the centaurs gallop past the train, nobody notices anything, nor does anyone notice the gigantic lion just hanging out in a forest. So we've got this visual aid for our campers of at least being hidden. But the visuals are key. For as much as these chapters play up the mist element and how they're actually being hidden and protected, at least on the mortal side of things, Annabeth notes that the correct visuals are important. You might be wondering what I mean. Well, it's not purely visible and invisible, though that is brought up. It's what you look like that is then used to identify who you are. And Annabeth and Percy talk about this specifically when it comes to Hades, because Percy describes the dream he's had about talking with a voice deep in the ground in a pit, and Annabeth says that's visually not correct. Hades is always viewed on a dark throne, and he never laughs. But she specifies the dark throne first. There is a visual language at play here that Percy needs to learn. And Percy can learn it because he is a demigod, so the mist shouldn't affect him. They didn't recognize the woman and the chihuahua were a chimera because she was purposely playing up with the mist to hide herself even from them. But the visual language of the gods is something Percy needs to learn very quickly. And it's fascinating because this visual language is actually something that we use even today. Hades on a dark throne in the underworld, that's how you identify Hades. Put it this way, how do you know Zeus? Lightning bolt. How do you know, in the Christian ideal, the good versus the evil? Well, halos versus horns. There is an iconography, which is a visual language we use even today. And in fact, with the Christian religion, this was played up a lot in medieval times, where you didn't have the written language everyone had access to. When you didn't have reading skills, a lot of people did have the reading skills for pictures, which is to say that certain images always have certain aspects to them, so you can actually tell who is who. Now, this is really true of the saints particularly because the saints, well, they're all going to look for the most part as old men, and every now and then you're going to throw a woman in there. But that alone is not enough to identify them. So you start having to identify sort of martyrdom. One of the best examples I can actually give you is a very strange one. It's because of where I've worked this summer, but St. Dismas. St. Dismas was the good thief crucified next to Christ. In the story, they're crucified in threes. So Christ is in the middle, and there's two thieves, one on either side. One basically laughs at Christ for being in this position, and the other asks for forgiveness. So the other one believes Jesus to be the Savior, even as he's being crucified. And Jesus actually says, yes, you will dine with me and my Father tonight in heaven. And in that moment, he is actually, St. Dismas, the only saint canonized by Christ himself. Precisely in this moment of forgiveness in death. Well, because of how he was forgiven, St. Dismas is one of the few other images that is visually portrayed as a crucified person. This image is often how Christ is presented, his death, as a way for people to ascend into heaven, but St. Dismas also has this imagery, but he doesn't have the specifics. He doesn't have the crown of thorns, he doesn't have the sign, he doesn't have the pierced side. So those visual differences can then tell you, am I looking at an image of Christ or am I looking at an image of St. Dismas? And then you look at the context of the whole. St. Dismas is a patron saint of condemned men. So if you're looking at a normal church, you're probably looking at an image of Christ. If you're then looking at a special place for people to pray for condemned family members, or St. Dismas is mostly found inside penitentiary walls. He's actually found inside prisons, especially prisons with death row. That's going to help the visual language. You can tell people a lot just by what you're showing them. You don't need the words, you don't need to understand the words. And this works in colors too. Blue is a big one for the royal pure. You're going to see Mary, Mother of Christ, in blue a lot. So this iconography is best known for medieval times and the medieval Christian religion, but it is present everywhere. You recognize symbols, and you should recognize symbols as shorthand. Why do you think we have emojis? Those are visual aids to allow for shorthand when face-to-face communication is not possible. I'm saying this thing, but I want them to treat it as a joke. Add a laughing emoji. I don't even want to say anything, but I want to agree. Thumbs up. There are so many messages you can communicate now in images alone that we really shouldn't be surprised when this shows up in, well, our books. And it does. Along with having certain characters that constantly show up, we should always be looking for those visual shorthands. We should be looking for the emojis of our literature and what they actually say. And what it says about us that we then can recognize that language. Riordan, again, is actually pointing to an aspect of human nature that results in the actions his characters take. The big reason why Zeus is so upset about the loss of his Master Bolt is because of his position and him being recognized in that position. There is a concern that somebody's going to make fake lightning bolts and try and take over as the head of the gods, but that's precisely it. Zeus is the head of the gods. His lightning bolt identifies him as such. But this is true in the iconography as well. How do you identify Zeus in images? Well, if there's a man standing there with a lightning bolt, that's Zeus. You're not looking at that going, is that Poseidon? Is that Hades? I can't... That lightning bolt is the identifier of Zeus, both in the images and as his position of power and his tool of power. We are actually seeing the iconography itself becoming key to the gods. And this is true of all of them. The fact is that we have this idea of Hades' iconography within the dream, and then as they're going into the arch, Percy asks about the helmet of invisibility. Am I gonna get this right? The helm of darkness, which allows him to merge into shadows and disappear and up people's fear and things like that. Well, the helmet again is iconography. You are understanding who you're looking at, precisely at the tools that he has, to the point where it was on display when he was visiting Olympus. Annabeth states that she saw the helm there. It is an identifier of Zeus in images, because the helm itself is not going to be useful for identifying Zeus in this world, in real life here, precisely because of its power. It will cause him to disappear. You won't be able to see him while he's wearing the helmet. But it's still the useful tool when recognizing Hades visually in an image, in a dream, or among all the other gods. The helm, like the lightning bolt, identifies who you're looking at, which makes all of these identifiable things critical to the gods in a very strange way. We thought the loss of the Master Bolt was because of the power loss, the ability to then make more lightning bolts from the Master Bolt. But it's actually critical to your perspective of who Zeus is. Zeus is not Zeus if you can't identify the lightning bolt with him. Just as Hades is not Hades without the Dark Throne and the Helm of Darkness. What's very unique is the first few dreams that Percy had about the gods. He didn't have that visual aid, so he actually saw them as two horses. We can identify that one was Poseidon and one was Zeus. And ultimately we end up with a horse and an eagle. We're getting closer because those are the animal images of these gods. They are the animals associated to them. But that's a visual language that Percy can better understand. So, what's happening here? Riordan is actually pointing us towards a way of identifying people in shorthand and making us think about precisely what's at stake, having removed some of those identifiers. We are looking at a destabilization of some of these gods precisely because they're losing how they can be recognized. And it should be making us think, well, how then do they continue to function after those removals? How critical is this iconography in our understanding of what's going on? And are there points that we then should be suspicious? And that's it. Percy is figuring this out. Annabeth noting that the iconography is wrong, Percy is starting to put things together. And he's getting a little confused about why Hades sent the kindly ones not to be violent, but to search for something. Where is it? Well, what's missing? There's a reason that the Helm of Darkness got dropped here as an item of what's happening. That's critical. It is critical for our understanding of Hades and how he exists in the world. So what happens if that's removed? That's the images and the language of images that's actually happening here in a text that we can very easily miss if we're not paying attention. It is the mist to us. We can only identify what we're seeing beyond it if we can identify the smaller things we can better understand. Which is to say, the trident of Poseidon, the lightning bolt of Zeus, the helm of Hades. We need to get the little things first before we can get the big picture. But how many symbols do we need to follow, and when does that language become confusing? Probably right about now, Percy's thinking. The reason why I've spoken so much about the iconography is that we're getting the sense it's actually critical for Percy's understanding of the world and Percy's understanding of himself. In the end of chapter 13, he's actually mocked for being faithless with the gods, particularly with Poseidon, his own father, because he doesn't really know what's going on. He doesn't know how to recognize the signs of those gods and how they're sort of imprinted everywhere. He takes a look at the river and thinks to himself, well, Poseidon's not here, this is a river, not the sea. Well, he's not recognizing that it's not necessarily the sea that is symbolizing Poseidon. It is water that is symbolizing Poseidon. And that's a critical difference. Understanding precisely what symbols apply to what person allows you to get across the entire meaning behind that image. So, Percy's moment of doubt here is understandable for someone who hasn't been told about all of these signs that he should be looking for. That's part of the reason why he's actually paired up with Annabeth. Annabeth is much more informed about the iconography of the gods, to the point where she's better in understanding that side of things than the mortal social side, which is why she has so much trouble with her mortal family. Part of that's certainly on their end too, but Annabeth is much more knowledgeable of the signs of the gods, and you actually see that in what she wants to be. She wants to be an architect, and being an architect is not just about the building itself, it's also about the little iconography you include in the building. And Annabeth really plays this up and points to it precisely because she says that she wants to build the greatest monument to the gods. She isn't talking about how she wants to build modern hospitals. She's talking about, again, that connection to the iconography, about building something that points to something else, about building something that represents the story of the gods. Her understanding of iconography is a big reason why she wants so much to be the building type, to bring something into the world, rather than simply destroy it. And she points to the earth shaker aspect of Poseidon, the earthquake aspect of Poseidon on that one, and Percy's own tendency to, I wouldn't say blow things up. He's not doing it on purpose, but things tend to blow up around him. So the understanding of the image versus the learning of it is played up here in the disagreements between Percy and Annabeth. There's really a question of knowing what's going on and seeing the little things that give it away. But even Annabeth, we have to recognize, is still a 12-year-old girl. She doesn't recognize this woman and the Chihuahua for what they are. There's still the ability to hide who and what you are, and hide the signs that show off what you are. And sometimes it's really easy to do. It's going to be critical for Percy to actually get through this entire thing, to be able to hide himself from all the mortals. But knowledge is power here. Knowledge is key for understanding what is going on, and lack of knowledge can be real frustrating. With that said, I'm going to keep reading, and I hope you do too. See you next time.